Hello readers and welcome to Tell Between Tales. Sorry if you hear a little bit of noise in the background. I've got my toddler running around today. That's just what happens when you try to YouTube with 5 kids. But today we are going to be talking Red Rising, and you may have heard of Red Rising being pitched as the Hunger Games on Mars. But this is selling it short. While the comparison isn't completely off base, it barely scratches the surface of what this brutal, morally complex sci-fi is about. Red Rising, while having some similarities with the Hunger Games, is something different with a completely different tone, message, and theme. And in this video, we will discuss what the Hunger Games is and what the Hunger Games isn't. And then we will go ahead and get into my thoughts and my interpretations of this and see if it is something that you would like to pick up. So far, I have read the first book, obviously, Red Rising, and I'm about halfway through the second book, Golden Son. So we are going to focus on the first book, obviously, in this one. I have heard, and maybe you have heard too, that Red Rising is the weakest of the trilogy and that the second and the third one really lets the series take off. And I can definitely say that the second book is really good so far. It's pretty amazing. But getting back to the first book, let's discuss these similarities between Red Rising and the Hunger Games. A lot of these similarities come into play, first off, based off of how the society is structured. In the Hunger Games, you have the capital, which is surrounded by the districts, and all of the resources goes to the capital. And you have the capital basically using the districts as more or less a type of slave labor. And as you get further and further out from District 1 to District 12, they get more and more poverty stricken, with District 12 being the worst of all, and the people of District 12 just trying to eke out a living. In the Hunger Games, our main character comes from District 12. In Red Rising, you have kind of a similar structure, but it's more of a caste system versus you have one central group and everything is going towards it. It is much more leveled, but still everything filters up. And that's going to be, you have the golds at the top, and then you have a bunch of different other colors as you go down the system, and they're all designated different duties within the society. And at the very bottom, you have the reds. And the reds are the ones that are going to be poverty-stricken, oppressed, and barely able to eke out a living. And our hero from this story, Darrow, comes from the Reds. The second comparison that you get with this book with the Hunger Games, and where a lot really of the comparison comes from, is going to be in the second half of Red Rising, where our character enters what people call the Hunger Games. Now, if you want to say that this is the Hunger Games in the sense that you have a bunch of teenagers thrown into an arena, then that would be an adequate comparison. However, really, this is a very different situation. After the popularity of the Hunger Games, people took no time copying this idea of a death tournament and getting a bunch of kids thrown into, for various reasons, a tournament where you have to be the last survivor. That is not what is going on here in Red Rising. That is not what this competition is about. Now, while people do die in the arena, say hello. Hello. Now, while people do die in this arena, the purpose of this is not to be the lone survivor. It is not to kill as many people as possible and survive and become the sole victor. So while it may look like just another brutal competition, the true purpose and motivations behind it are much more complex and far more ambitious. And it really plays into the society that has been created and gives us a look into how these people think and function. Some of the themes and what the, for lack of a better term, game makers are hoping to teach from this tournament is going to be how to attain power and how to hold on to it, and learning what your personal limits are, the lengths you're willing to go to get what you want and to achieve and accomplish your purposes, and the price that you're ultimately willing to pay. So the game makers, which aren't really given a name, I'm just calling them that for convenience, and since we're comparing to the Hunger Games, they want to see what each person is capable of And as a result, this is going to launch your career in the society and help you find your place. And the people who perform the best will obviously end up with the highest positions in the society after this is over. Now, before we get into my thoughts on the plot and the characters, let's take a look at this world and how things are set up a bit. So our title, Red Rising, really tells us that our hero, who comes from the Reds, is rising up. That's pretty obvious. But what he's doing is he is rising through the ranks and infiltrating the Golds in a long-term plan to overthrow the government. Now, Pierce Brown does a really interesting thing that delineates each of the different levels in this system, and that is something I'm not going to spoil for you here, but I really enjoyed his world building, and I thought that he had some pretty original creativity, which you can really see coming out in the second book as well. So about Darrow and the Reds. Darrow is a member of the lowest color-coded castes in the society of the future. Like his fellow Reds, he works all day long in the mines harvesting helium-3 to terraform the atmosphere of Mars to make it livable for future generations. And him and his society, they toil willingly, trusting that their efforts and their sweat and their sacrifices are going to ultimately pay off down the road to make life a better place for humans in the future. And I would pretty much encourage you to stop here, because there is a very big spoiler that everybody spoils. And if you've heard anything about Red Rising, or even if you've read the back of the book, you probably already know about this. If there is any chance that you have happened upon this video without hearing a lot about Red Rising, don't go out and watch other videos. Don't go out and read the back of the book. When you pick up the book, just don't read the back, because there is a major plot point spoiler that takes place about a quarter of the way through the book. And as I was reading the beginning of the book, because I already knew this, I actually quit in the probably first 10% because I was just wanting to get through the first part, and I was like, okay, come on, let's get over this. And so I think that it would work a lot better without knowing that. And you can tell as you're reading that things are building up, and there's going to be this huge emotional moment and this really big reveal, and it just falls so flat. And so hopefully, if you don't already know what it is, hopefully you can't guess what it is already. And I think that it will hit a little bit harder for you and just have a bit more of an emotional impact, and you'll enjoy the beginning and opening sequences of the book a little bit better. Once I got past these opening sequences, the world that Brown created was chaotic at best and hedonistic at worst. Definitely not any kind of society I would want to live in, but that may have simply been because of where our character ends up. After all, if I left my safe middle class zones and went into the ghettos and the nightclubs, I would probably encounter all of the things that Darrow encounters, being sex, drugs, debauchery, and all of the shady business. Now we're going to take a moment to talk content, specifically language and violence, because this book pulls no punches. The language isn't the best, but it's not the worst. There's a fair amount of minor curse words, and they kind of make up some of their own as well. One of the good things is that there really aren't any F-bombs in this book, which is nice, but he does seem a little bit fond of the S word, so we give this one a rating of about 5 to 6 on the scale. When it comes to violence, this book is a lot. I'm no stranger to violence in my books, but Red Rising portrays a particularly visceral brand of brutality that often toes the line between impactful and excessive. Once the competition begins, the violence ramps up dramatically. There are many references to sexual assault, thankfully not described explicitly, vividly detailed deaths, and a few moments that were downright grotesque. One scene in particular involves a disturbingly creative tactic involving corpses that I won't fully describe here, but trust me, it's not for the faint of heart. It was a lot. But I can also recognize that this violence isn't gratuitous just for shock's sake. It illustrates not only the ruthlessness of the world Brown has created, but also the twisted ingenuity of the leaders as they strategize and manipulate their way to dominance. The book explores how quickly civilization can unravel when order is stripped away, and how violence becomes a tool for both survival and control. While I personally found parts of it a little bit overwhelming, I can also recognize the thematic weight behind it. So if this sounds like something that might appeal to you, or something that isn't going to bother you, then forge right on ahead. Now, what grated on me most about Red Rising and reading this book was the relentless posturing that permeated nearly every interaction. It was incredibly excessive. The gold society that is created and all of the one-upmanship that is in there really grated on my nerves. The story is saturated with a kind of hyper-masculine energy, though it's important to note that the women are just as entrenched in this aggressive one-upmanship as the men. Every character seems locked in a constant battle for dominance, with status and power hanging on who can insult or undermine the others in the most cutting, primal way. It felt like every conversation was a sparring match, every alliance a thinly veiled power play. While I understand this dynamic is intentional, meant to reflect the brutal world Pierce Brown has created, the sheer volume of chest-thumping and petty slights wore me down quickly. Rather than being impressed by the tactical mind games, I found myself exhausted by the toxic bravado. Now, what I thought that the author did really, really well with Darrow's story was Darrow's moral dilemma and his transformation as he struggles to hold onto his past values while being forced into a situation that directly challenges those morals. And he is forced time and again to choose between his past virtue or continue on with the plan for what he hopes is a greater payoff. It's really the kind of moral dilemma that you see if you've seen the TV series Andor. Our character Luthen, also known as Axis in the first season, this is the moral state that he's already arrived at. And we see Darrow going through this and living out basically what Luthen describes in his speech. Now, if you haven't seen Andor, you really should go and watch, especially the first season. The speech, I'm not going to spoil the whole thing in there for you that Luthen says, but it's all about the costs of rebellion and the costs to one's soul for giving up your soul and yourself to this cause of rebellion and the cost of that. And this line that he says in particular, I think really goes well with what we are seeing Darrow struggling with. And that is going to be, I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, while Luthen arrived at this place a long time ago, again, we get to see Darrow struggling through this and having all of these challenges to his morality and how he is going to deal with this mentally and emotionally. So for a few final thoughts, I rated this book a 3 out of 5, and I've also heard that this is the weakest book in the series, and so I am really excited to continue on with the series. Like I said, I'm about halfway done with the second book, and it's definitely ramped up in the pacing and the stakes and the intricacies of the world, and that has all become much more interesting. And I'm excited to see where it goes. In the end, Red Rising is a story about revolution and identity and what we're willing to sacrifice for a better future, as well as exploring the leadership and the costs of leadership and what it takes to gain that and to hold on to that, and what it takes to make a community out of a group of barbaric tribes. And how do we bring everybody in and govern them? Let me know what your thoughts are on this book if you've read it. And a shout out to my brother, hello, who I knew was waiting for this review. And thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.